The SS Resolute drifted silently through the endless void of space, its engines humming faintly as it navigated the edge of the Sagittarius void. This was uncharted territory, a region where stars were few and far between, shrouded in darkness. That seemed almost alive. Captain Jihoon stood on the bridge, his sharp eyes scanning the holographic display projected before him. He was a man who carried calmness like armor, his decisions always measured, never rushed. Beside him, Mijin, the ship's chief engineer, leaned over the console, her fingers flying across the controls as she adjusted the long-range sensors. It had been a routine mission, or so they thought. The Resolute, a deep space salvage vessel, operated by the Pan-Pacific Terran Cooperative, had been tasked with mapping this remote sector for potential resources. But then, something unusual appeared on their scanners. A massive object, drifting aimlessly in orbit around a dead neutron star. Its metallic surface glinted dully under the faint light of distant suns, but there was no sign of activity. No transponder signal, no heat signature, no distress call. Just silence. Jihoon frowned. "What do we have here?" he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. Mijin glanced up from her console. "Unknown vessel. Bigger than us. No identifying marks. Could be derelict. Or could be trouble." Daeho, the security chief, added gruffly. His broad frame filled the doorway leading onto the bridge, arms crossed over his chest. Ex-military, Daeho had little patience for mysteries. To him, anything unknown was a potential threat until proven otherwise. Jihoon nodded slowly. "We'll proceed cautiously. Sang-woo, hail them. Let's see if anyone's home." Sang-woo, the young communications officer, adjusted his headset and keyed in the standard greeting code used across human space. Static crackled through the speakers for several moments before fading into silence. No response. "They're not answering," Sang-woo said quietly, disappointment tugging at his voice. "No surprise there," Mijin muttered. "Whatever that thing is, it looks like it's been out here for years." Jihoon studied the image of the alien craft on the display. It was unlike anything he'd ever seen, a hulking mass of jagged edges and strange protrusions, its design, both alien and unsettling. Some parts of the hull gleamed brightly, while others were pitted and scarred, as though it had endured centuries of micrometeorite impacts. Yet there were other marks, too, deep gashes that didn't look natural, almost, as if they'd been torn open by some kind of internal explosion. "We're not leaving without answers," Jihoon decided firmly. "Daeho, assemble a boarding team. Mijin, Sang-woo, you're with him. We'll take a closer look." Minutes later, the four suited figures floated toward the mysterious vessel aboard a small shuttlecraft. Their EVA suits clung tightly to their bodies designed to protect against the cold vacuum of space. Jihoon watched from the Resolute's viewport as they approached, his mind racing with possibilities. What was this ship? Who or what had built it? And why was it abandoned here, adrift in the middle of nowhere? As the shuttle docked with the alien craft, Daeho led the way inside, his weapon drawn and ready. The airlock cycled open with a hiss, revealing a dark corridor beyond. Gravity plating flickered erratically beneath their boots, making each step feel uncertain. Frost coated the walls, glittering like diamonds in the dim emergency lighting. Alien script lined the corridors, sharp, angular symbols etched into the metal, glowing faintly with an eerie blue light. "This place gives me the creeps," Sang-woo whispered, his voice trembling slightly despite his attempts to sound brave. "Stay focused," Daeho ordered sharply. "We're here to gather intel, not spook ourselves." They moved deeper into the ship, flashlights cutting through the gloom. The interior was vast and labyrinthine, with hallways branching off in every direction. At first, there was no sign of life or death. But then they found the bodies. Scattered throughout the corridors were the remains of the ship's crew, or rather, what might once have passed for a crew. These creatures were nothing like humans. They resembled living crystals, their forms multifaceted and intricate, now shattered and lifeless. Each corpse sparkled faintly, catching the light of their torches, but there was no mistaking the damage. They had been destroyed violently. "What happened here?" Sang-woo asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mijin knelt beside one of the bodies, examining it closely. "Hard to say. Looks like whatever killed them came from within." Maybe some kind of internal malfunction or sabotage. Daeho shook his head grimly. Or maybe they weren't alone. Their exploration continued, but the further they went, the heavier the atmosphere became. It wasn't just the oppressive silence or the eerie glow of the alien script. There was something else, a sense of dread that seemed to seep into their very bones. Then, they reached a sealed chamber near the heart of the ship. Its reinforced door was partially ajar, as though someone, or something, had tried to force. It opened from the inside. "Careful," Daeho warned, raising his weapon. "This is where things get tricky." With great effort, they managed to pry the door open wide enough to slip inside. The chamber was unlike any room they had seen before. In its center floated a crystalline pod, suspended in midair by a failing stasis field. Within the pod lay a single entity, a being made entirely of shifting crystal lattices, its core pulsing weakly with a faint bioluminescent glow. "It's alive," Mijin breathed, awe evident in her tone. Before anyone could respond, a sudden pulse rippled through the chamber, resonating in their minds rather than their ears. Images flooded their thoughts, vivid, chaotic flashes of a world unlike anything they'd ever imagined. Glass forests swayed in gentle winds, their crystalline leaves chiming softly. A peaceful civilization thrived among these wonders, their technology seamlessly integrated with nature. But then came the horror. A swarm descended upon their world, twisted biomechanical monstrosities that consumed everything in their path. The crew of the ship fought back valiantly, but ultimately they were overwhelmed. In a final act of desperation, the captain activated a catastrophic overload, tearing the ship apart from within to prevent the swarm from spreading. When the vision faded, Sangwoo stumbled backward, clutching his helmet. That was their story. Their warning. Daeho lowered his weapon, his expression unreadable. A warning about what? Mijin turned to face him, her voice steady but urgent. About something coming. Something worse than anything we've faced before. Jihoon's voice crackled through their comms. "Report! What's going on down there?" Daeho hesitated, then replied, "Captain, you need to see this for yourself." Back aboard the Resolute, Jihoon listened intently as the team recounted what they had discovered. The crystalline survivor, the only remnant of an entire species, was still alive, albeit barely. Its existence posed questions they couldn't yet answer. Why had it survived when the rest perished? Was it truly alone? Or were there others hiding somewhere in the depths of space? But one thing was clear. This ship wasn't just a relic. It was a message. A plea for help. And humanity had a choice to make. Would they heed the warning? Or would they turn away, leaving the past and its horrors to drift forever in the silent void? For now, all Jihoon could do was stare out at the alien vessel, its battered hull reflecting the faint light of distant stars. Whatever decision he made, it wouldn't come easily. Because in the vastness of space, even silence could speak volumes. The SS Resolute hung in the cold emptiness of space, its hull creaking faintly as it orbited the alien derelict. Inside, the crew gathered around a holographic display on the bridge, their faces tense with unease. Captain Jihoon stood at the center, his arms crossed over his chest, his jaw tight as he processed the information Mijin had just shared. "We've got a survivor," Mijin said, her voice steady but tinged with urgency. "Whatever's inside that pod, it's alive. Barely. But if we don't stabilize it soon, it'll die." Jihoon nodded slowly. "And this vision you all experienced?" Sangwoo stepped forward, his young face pale but determined. "It wasn't just random images, Captain. It was a memory. Their world. Everything they built. It was destroyed by some kind of swarm. A living weapon. They sacrificed themselves to stop it from spreading." Daeho, leaning against the wall with his arms folded, let out a low grunt. "So what? We're supposed to believe this thing is harmless? Might as well be luring us into a trap?" "No," Mijin countered sharply. "If it wanted to hurt us, it could have done so already. That pulse, it wasn't an attack. It was communication, a cry for help." Jihoon rubbed his temples, his mind racing. He trusted his crew, but this was uncharted territory. Humanity had encountered alien life before, but never like this. Never. Something so fragile, so desperate. Still, one question lingered in his thoughts. What happens if we leave it here? He asked quietly. Mijin hesitated. It dies, and whatever warning it carries dies with it. Yuna, the medical officer, spoke up for the first time. Her voice was calm but firm. We can't ignore this, Captain. If what Sangwoo says is true, if that swarm is still out there, we need to know everything we can about it. Ji-hoon exhaled, deeply. Then we bring it aboard. Carefully. Hours later, the crystalline survivor, designated Kale after the telepathic impression it projected, was secured in the ship's bio-isolation chamber. The stasis pod had been rigged with stabilizers, and Yuna monitored its vital signs closely. Kale's core flickered weakly, its glow dimming with each passing minute. It's fighting to stay alive, Yuna murmured, her hands hovering over the controls. But it's losing. Mijin worked alongside her, analyzing the data streaming from the pod. Its energy reserves are almost depleted. Whatever powered it before, it's gone now. We need to find a way to sustain it, or it won't last much longer. While the medical team worked, Ji-hoon turned his attention to the alien ship's logs. With Sangwoo's help, they decrypted fragments of the alien script scrawled across the walls. The language was complex, non-linear, but patterns began to emerge. They were running, Sangwoo said, his eyes scanning the translation interface. Not just from the swarm, but towards something. A place they thought would be safe. Did they make it? Ji-hoon asked. Sangwoo shook his head. No. The logs cut off right before the overload. But there's more. He paused, his brow furrowing. Captain, the swarm. They weren't just attacking randomly. They were targeting worlds with advanced civilizations. These things, they feed on life, complex life, and once they consume enough, they grow stronger. Ji-hoon felt a chill run down his spine. How many worlds did they destroy? At least 3, Sangwoo replied grimly. Maybe more. We can't tell for sure. But one thing's clear. They didn't stop. Not until the aliens blew themselves. Up to contain them. And now? Ji-hoon pressed. Sangwoo hesitated, then pointed to a series of coordinates embedded in the logs. This was their destination. A system near the Orion Arm. Close to human space. The room fell silent. Ji-hoon stared at the blinking dot on the display, his mind racing. If the swarm was still active and heading toward human colonies, the implications were catastrophic. Before anyone could speak, alarms blared throughout the ship. Red lights flashed across the bridge, and Daeho's voice crackled through the comms. Captain, we've got company. Ji-hoon sprinted to the viewport, his heart pounding. In the distance, a cluster of jagged, asymmetrical shapes emerged from the void. They pulsed with dark energy, their surfaces writhing like living tissue. The swarm, Ji-hoon whispered. Mijin joined him, her face pale. They followed the trail of the derelict. They must have detected residual biosignatures. Daeho's voice came again, urgent and sharp. What's the plan, Captain? Because those things aren't stopping. Ji-hoon clenched his fists, his mind working furiously. The Resolute was no warship. Its weapons were limited. A pair of railguns and a point defense laser grid designed for asteroid deflection, not combat. Against the swarm, they stood no chance. But then Mijin spoke up, her tone resolute. There's one option, the alien, ship's core. It's unstable, but we can trigger a controlled implosion. Use it as a mine. Buy ourselves time. Ji-hoon turned to her, his expression grim. That'll leave us blind and powerless for hours, and Kale might not survive the blast wave. Yuna stepped forward, her voice unwavering. If we don't stop them here, billions will die. That ship wasn't just a tomb. It was a warning we can't ignore. Sangwoo nodded, his youthful idealism shining through. They gave their lives to stop the swarm. We owe it to them to try. Ji-hoon hesitated only for a moment before making his decision. Do it. Prep the derelict for detonation. Daeho, get everyone back aboard. Now! As the crew scrambled to execute the plan, tension filled every corner of the Resolute. Mijin rerouted power from the engines to the alien core, rigging it with explosive charges salvaged from the ship's emergency stores. Daeho led the evacuation team, ensuring everyone made it back safely. On the bridge, Jihoon watched the swarm grow larger on the viewport, their grotesque forms undulating with unnatural speed. They moved with purpose, drawn to the derelict like predators scenting prey. Core destabilization at 60%, Mijin reported, her fingers flying across the console. Detonation in 3 minutes, Yuna added, her voice calm despite the chaos. Sangwoo manned the decoy drones, launching one toward the swarm to distract them. The tiny device emitted a burst of electromagnetic interference, drawing the creature's attention. For a brief moment, the swarm veered off course, giving the Resolute precious seconds to disengage. "Everyone, brace for impact!" Jihoon shouted as the countdown reached 0. The alien ship erupted in a silent explosion, a violet-white supernova that warped the fabric of space itself. Gravity waves rippled outward, shredding the lead swarm ships and scattering the rest into disarray. The shockwave hit the Resolute moments later, shaking the vessel violently. Lights flickered, consoles sparked, and the hum of the engines died. Completely. When the chaos subsided, the ship drifted silently, powerless and adrift. Jihoon staggered to his feet, surveying the damage. "Status report!" "Engines offline," Mijin called out, her voice strained. "Life support holding, for now. Hull integrity compromised in sections 3 and 4. "Comms are down," Sangwoo added. "We're cut off. For a long moment." The bridge was silent. The crew exchanged worried glances, the weight of their situation sinking in. They were alone, vulnerable, and stranded in deep space. And then, from the static-filled silence of the comms channel, a faint voice broke through. "Unknown vessel, this is UNSC Daegu. Identify yourself." Jihoon froze, his heart skipping a beat. He grabbed the mic, his voice hoarse but steady. "This is Captain Jihoon of the SS Resolute. Requesting immediate assistance." There was a pause, followed by a reply. "Copy that, Resolute. We're en route. Hold tight." Relief washed over the crew, but Jihoon knew the battle wasn't over. The swarm had been delayed but not defeated, and Kale, their sole link to understanding the threat, was still clinging to life. As the Daegu approached, its massive silhouette cutting through the darkness, Jihoon allowed himself a small measure of hope. Humanity had found them in the vastness of space. But the real question remained. Would humanity listen to the warning they carried, or would the silence return, louder than ever? The UNSC Daegu loomed large in the viewport as it pulled alongside the crippled SS Resolute. Its sleek, armored hull gleamed faintly under the distant light of a dying star. For a moment, Captain Jihoon simply stared at it, relief washing over him like a wave. They weren't alone anymore. Humanity had found them, but there was no time to celebrate. The Resolute was in bad shape. Its engines were offline, its hull cracked in several places, and its systems barely holding together. Worse still, Kale, the crystalline survivor from the alien derelict, was fading fast. Yuna monitored its vitals closely, her expression grim. The stasis pod flickered erratically, its energy reserves nearly depleted. If they didn't stabilize, Kale, soon it would die, and with it, the only link to the truth about the swarm. Admiral Park, the commanding officer of the Daegu, greeted Jihoon aboard his ship with a curt nod. She was a tall woman with sharp features, her uniform crisp and immaculate. Her eyes scanned the weary crew of the Resolute before settling on Jihoon. "Captain," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "Explain." Jihoon took a deep breath. He recounted everything: the discovery of the alien derelict, the vision they had experienced through Kale, the swarm's arrival, and the desperate decision to detonate the alien ship's core. Admiral Park listened intently, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she turned to Mijin. "You're certain this creature is sentient?" she asked. Mijin nodded. "Yes, ma'am. It communicated telepathically. Showed us what happened to its people. Their world was destroyed by the swarm, a self-replicating weapon designed to consume life." "And you believe this threat is real?" Admiral Park pressed. "It's not just a belief," Sangwoo interjected. His voice trembled slightly, but his conviction was clear. "It's a fact. The swarm isn't gone. It's out there, and if we don't stop it, it will come for us next." Admiral Park studied the young communications officer for a moment, then turned back to Jihoon. "Bring me proof." Kale was transported to the Daigu's advanced bio-isolation chamber, where scientists worked tirelessly to stabilize it. At first, progress was slow. The crystalline being's physiology defied conventional understanding. It wasn't organic in the traditional sense, nor was it purely mechanical. It existed somewhere in between, a fusion of biology and technology that baffled even the brightest minds aboard the Daegu. But then, something remarkable happened. As the scientists adjusted the chamber's parameters, Kale began to respond. Its core pulsed brighter, and faint vibrations resonated through the walls. Slowly, haltingly, it projected images into their minds. Not chaotic flashes this time, but coherent memories. Scenes of its homeworld, vibrant and alive, filled with crystalline forests and shimmering rivers. Then came the horror. The swarm, descending like a plague, consuming everything in its path. Admiral Park watched the footage captured by neural interfaces, her face pale. "This isn't just a weapon," she murmured. "It's an extinction event." Jihoon stood beside her, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. "That's why we need to act now. Every second we waste gives the swarm more time to grow stronger." Admiral Park turned to him, her eyes narrowing. "And what do you propose? We don't even know how to fight this thing." "We adapt," Jihoon replied firmly. "We use what we learned from the alien logs, their technology, their tactics. We prepare." Park hesitated, then nodded. "Very well, but we'll need more than one ship. This isn't just your fight anymore. It's humanity's." Back on Earth, the message spread like wildfire. Admiral Park broadcast Kyle's story, not just to military command, but to every civilian network, every colony, every ship in human space. The response was unprecedented. Freighters rerouted their courses to form early warning grids along the outer edges of human territory. Mining stations armed themselves with improvised weapons, turning drills and plasma torches into makeshift cannons. Scientists from Sol to Mars worked around the clock, reverse engineering fragments of alien tech salvaged from the derelict. Civilians volunteered for evacuation drills, preparing for the worst. Even pirates, long seen as enemies of humanity, offered safe passage through contested zones, pledging their support against the coming threat. For the first time in decades, Earth wasn't divided. It was united. Yuna watched the reports flood in from across human space, her heart swelling with pride. "They're listening," she whispered. Sangwoo smiled faintly. "Of course they are. This isn't just about survival, it's about honor. Those aliens, they gave everything to protect us. Now it's our turn to carry the torch." Despite the unity sweeping through human space, the reality of the situation weighed heavily on everyone aboard the Daegu. The swarm hadn't been defeated, it had merely been delayed, and when it returned, it would be stronger, faster, and deadlier than before. Daeho paced the length of the armory, inspecting the newly modified weapons systems. Railguns had been upgraded with experimental gravity disruptors designed to tear apart the swarm's biomechanical forms. Point defense lasers were recalibrated to target weak points identified in Kyle's memories. Even the ship's hull had been reinforced with adaptive plating, capable of shifting to counteract the swarm's corrosive attacks. But Daeho knew better than anyone that firepower alone wouldn't be enough. "This isn't going to be a fair fight," he muttered to himself. "It's going to be a slaughter, for them or for us." Mijin joined him, her hands smeared with grease from hours spent repairing the Resolute. "Then we make sure it's for them," she said firmly. Days turned into weeks as the Daegu led a convoy of ships toward the edge of human space. Their mission was simple yet daunting: intercept the swarm before it reached populated systems. Intelligence suggested the creatures were massing near the Oort cloud, drawn by residual biosignatures left behind during their earlier encounter. On the bridge of the Daegu, Jihoon stood beside Admiral Park, his gaze fixed on the viewport. Ahead, the void stretched endlessly, dotted with faint pinpricks of light. Somewhere out there, the swarm waited. "How long until we reach the interception point?" Jihoon asked quietly. 48 hours, Admiral Park replied. "Plenty of time to prepare." but not enough to rest. Ji-hoon nodded. Understood. Behind them, Kale's chamber hummed softly, its core glowing steadily. The crystalline being had regained some strength, though it remained fragile. Still, its presence served as a constant reminder of what was at stake. As the convoy pressed onward, communication channels buzzed with activity. Pilots exchanged strategies, engineers shared schematics, and soldiers drilled relentlessly. Morale was high, fueled by a shared sense of purpose. But beneath the surface, fear lingered. Everyone aboard the Daegu knew the odds. The swarm was relentless, unstoppable by conventional means. If humanity failed, if even one fragment of the swarm slipped past them, it would mean the end of everything. Yet despite the uncertainty, Ji-hoon felt a spark of hope. Humanity had faced extinction-level threats before. Wars, plagues, natural disasters, all had tested the limits of their resilience, and each time they had risen to meet the challenge. This time would be no different, because now they weren't fighting just for themselves. They were fighting for the fallen, and they would not falter. The convoy of ships moved steadily toward the Oort cloud, their engines glowing faintly against the endless blackness of space. At the forefront was the UNSC Daegu, its massive hull bristling with weapons and sensors. Behind it trailed a ragtag fleet of civilian freighters, mining vessels, and repurposed transports, each one armed to the teeth with whatever humanity could cobble together in such a short time. It wasn't pretty, but it was enough, for now. Captain Ji-hoon stood on the bridge of the Daegu, his eyes fixed on the holographic display showing their trajectory. The swarm's projected arrival point was marked by a blinking red dot, a tiny speck in the vast emptiness of space that represented the fate of billions. He clenched his fists tightly, his knuckles white beneath his gloves. This wasn't just another mission. This was everything. Admiral Park approached him, her expression unreadable. "Captain," she said quietly, "the fleet is ready. Are you?" Ji-hoon turned to face her, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "As ready as we'll ever be." Park nodded, then addressed the entire crew over the shipwide comms. Her tone was firm, but carried an undercurrent of quiet determination. "This is it. The moment we've been preparing for. Out there lies a threat unlike anything we've faced before. But I want you all to remember something. We're not fighting just for ourselves. We're fighting for every man, woman, and child who calls this galaxy home. For those who can't fight back. For those who came before us. And those who will come after." A murmur of agreement rippled through the bridge, followed by silence. Everyone understood what was at stake. Failure wasn't an option. In the hours leading up to the battle, the fleet prepared feverishly. Engineers worked around the clock, fine-tuning weapon systems and reinforcing hulls. Pilots ran simulations, practicing evasive maneuvers and attack patterns. Soldiers checked their gear, their faces grim but resolute. Even civilians aboard the auxiliary ships pitched in, loading ammunition, repairing equipment, or simply standing watch. Kale remained in the bio-isolation chamber, its core pulsing faintly as though it too sensed the approaching storm. Yuna monitored its condition closely, ensuring its energy reserves stayed stable. Despite its fragility, Kyle had become a symbol of hope, a reminder of why they were here. Every glance at its shimmering form reinforced their resolve. Mi-jin spent most of her time in the engine room of the Resolute, which had been towed along as part of the convoy. Though heavily damaged, the salvage vessel still had some functionality left. She tinkered with its systems, rigging makeshift defenses and jury-rigging backup power sources. "If nothing else," she muttered to herself, "we'll give them hell before we go down." Daeho oversaw the armory, inspecting every weapon personally. His usual stoicism had softened slightly, replaced by a quiet intensity. "These things are monsters," he told anyone who would listen. "But monsters bleed too, and today we make sure they bleed out." Sangwoo manned the communication station, coordinating between ships and relaying updates from Kale, the crystalline, being continued to share fragments of its people's knowledge, tactics, weaknesses, strategies. Each new piece of information gave humanity a sliver of advantage. Still, Sangwoo couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into the unknown. No matter how much they prepared, the swarm was unpredictable. When the swarm finally appeared, it wasn't subtle. At first, it was just a faint ripple in the void, a distortion in space-time that sent shivers down everyone's spines. Then, like a tide of darkness, the creatures emerged. Hundreds of jagged biomechanical forms swarmed into view, their surfaces writhing with unnatural movement. They pulsed with dark energy, their presence suffocating, oppressive. "Here we go," Daho growled, gripping his weapon tightly. The swarm wasted no time. It surged forward, faster than anyone had anticipated, its movements chaotic yet coordinated. Ships at the rear of the convoy opened fire immediately, their railguns and lasers slicing through the void. Explosions lit up the darkness as projectiles tore into the swarm's ranks, but for every creature destroyed, two more seemed to take its place. "They're adapting!" Mijin shouted over the comms. "Their outer layers are shifting, they're countering our attacks!" "Switch to disruptor frequencies," Admiral Park commanded. "Target their cores!" The fleet adjusted its tactics accordingly. Gravity disruptors hummed to life, sending shockwaves through the swarm. Some of the creatures shattered instantly, their cores collapsing under the destabilizing force. Others split apart, only to reform moments later, their resilience maddening. The Daegu led the charge, its advanced weaponry carving through the swarm with brutal efficiency. Plasma lances seared through the void, leaving trails of vaporized debris in their wake. Point defense lasers intercepted smaller creatures attempting to breach the ship's hull, yet even the mighty cruiser wasn't invincible. Its shields flickered, under relentless assault, and chunks of its armor began to peel away. "We're taking heavy damage," someone called out from the engineering bay. "Hold the line," Admiral Park barked. "We retreat and humanity dies." Amidst the chaos, Jihoon found himself torn between awe and despair. Humanity was putting up a fight unlike anything he'd ever seen. Freighters rammed into the swarm, sacrificing themselves to create openings for others to exploit. Mining ships unleashed torrents of molten metal, their drills spinning wildly as they carved through waves of enemies. Civilians aboard unarmed vessels used flares and decoys to draw the swarm's attention, buying precious seconds for the fleet to regroup. And yet, it wasn't enough. The swarm kept coming, relentless and unyielding. Its numbers seemed endless, its hunger insatiable. Ships exploded in fiery bursts, their crews lost forever. Pilots screamed over open channels as their vessels were overwhelmed. The convoy was shrinking, its once proud formation crumbling under the weight of the assault. Jihoon clenched his jaw, forcing himself to focus. "Sangwoo, status on Kale." "It's stable," Sangwoo replied quickly. "It's feeding us real-time data, patterns, weak points. If we can isolate the swarm's central hive mind, we might be able to collapse it." "Where is it?" Jihoon demanded. "There." Sangwoo pointed to a cluster of larger creatures at the heart of the swarm. Their forms were bulkier, more intricate, pulsing with a deep, ominous glow. Admiral Park didn't hesitate. "All ships, concentrate fire on the central cluster. Bring it down." The fleet rallied, pouring everything they had into the attack. Railguns fired in synchronized volleys, their payloads punching through the swarm's outer layers. Gravity disruptors created localized implosions, tearing gaping holes in the enemy's ranks. Fighters darted through the chaos, launching missiles directly into the hive mind's core. For a moment, it seemed like they might succeed. The central cluster wavered, its glow dimming as cracks spread across its surface. Then, without warning, the swarm retaliated. A massive wave of creatures surged forward, overwhelming the fleet's defenses. Shields collapsed, hulls buckled, and ships disintegrated in blinding flashes of light. The Daegu itself took a direct hit, its bridge shaking violently as alarms blared. "We're losing structural integrity," an engineer shouted. "Keep firing," Admiral Park roared. "Don't stop." Just when it seemed like all hope was lost, something extraordinary happened. Kale's chamber erupted in a burst of light, its core flaring brighter than ever before. A pulse of energy radiated outward, syncing with the fleet's weapon systems. Suddenly, every shot fired became exponentially more powerful. Gravity disruptors warped entire sections of the swarm into oblivion. Plasma lances sliced through. The hive mind's defense is like paper. "What's happening?" Jihoon asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "It's Kale," Yuna replied, her eyes wide with wonder. "It's amplifying our attacks, feeding off our resolve." With renewed vigor, the fleet pressed the advantage. The central cluster shattered in a brilliant explosion, sending shockwaves through the remaining swarm. One by one, the creatures began to falter, their bodies collapsing inward as the hive mind dissolved. When the last fragment of the swarm imploded in a silent flash, the void fell eerily quiet. On the bridge of the Daegu, the crew stared out at the wreckage, their chests heaving with exhaustion. Tears streamed down Sangwoo's face as he whispered, "We did it!" Ji-hoon placed a hand on his shoulder, his own eyes glistening. "No," he said softly. "We did it together." Farther back, Kale's chamber dimmed, its core stabilizing once more. The crystalline being had given everything it had left, not just to survive, but to ensure humanity's victory. As the survivors began to pick up the pieces, Admiral Park spoke over the fleet-wide channel. Her voice was hoarse, but filled with pride. "This isn't the end," she said. "It's the beginning. Today we proved that humanity doesn't back down, that we stand together no matter the odds. Let this day be remembered, not as a tragedy, but as a triumph. And across 1,000 worlds, the story spread. Humanity had faced extinction and chosen to fight back, not for glory." The silence that followed the battle was deafening. The void of space, once filled with the chaos of explosions and the writhing forms of the swarm, was now empty, save for the drifting wreckage of ships, both human and alien. The survivors, aboard the UNSC Daegu and the remaining vessels of the convoy, floated in stunned disbelief, their bodies weary but their spirits alight with a fragile sense of triumph. Captain Ji-hoon stood on the bridge, his hands gripping the railing as he stared out at the aftermath. His uniform was torn and smudged with soot, his face lined with exhaustion, but his eyes burned with determination. Around him, the crew moved quietly, tending to the wounded, assessing the damage, and scanning for any signs of surviving enemies. For now, there was nothing. Just emptiness. Admiral Park approached him, her expression unreadable. "We won," she said simply, her voice heavy with emotion. Ji-hoon nodded slowly. "Yes, but at what cost?" The question hung in the air like a shadow. Dozens of ships had been lost, their crews gone forever. Pilots who had flown bravely into the swarm's maw were now just names on casualty lists. Civilians who had volunteered to fight alongside the military had sacrificed everything. They had. Even the Resolute, Ji-hoon's own ship, was little more than a battered husk, towed back by another vessel after sustaining catastrophic damage. And yet, despite the losses, humanity had prevailed. Kale remained in its bio-isolation chamber, its core dim but steady. Yuna monitored it closely, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the stabilizers. The crystalline being had given everything it had left to amplify the fleet's attacks, ensuring humanity's victory. Now it rested, its energy reserves dangerously low. "He's fading," Yuna whispered to Ji-hoon when he visited the chamber. "If we don't find a way to sustain him, he won't last much longer." Ji-hoon stared at Kale, his heart heavy with gratitude and guilt. "He saved us all. We can't let him die. Not after everything." Mi-jin joined them moments later, her usual sharpness softened by fatigue. "I've been thinking," she said, hesitantly. "What if we use the alien tech we salvaged from the derelict? Maybe we can adapt it to stabilize him." Yuna's eyes widened. "It's risky. If we get it wrong, we could kill him faster." "But if we do nothing, he dies anyway," Mi-jin countered firmly. "We owe it to him to try." Ji-hoon nodded. "Do it. Whatever it takes." Hours passed as Mi-jin and Yuna worked tirelessly to integrate the alien technology with Kale's pod. The process was painstaking, requiring precise adjustments to match the crystalline being's unique physiology. Sangwoo assisted remotely, relaying insights gleaned from Kale's earlier transmissions. Daeho stood guard outside the chamber, his weapon ready despite the absence of immediate threats. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the chamber hummed softly, and Kale's core began to glow brighter. Its lattice structure shimmered faintly, pulsing with renewed vitality. "It's working," Yuna breathed, tears streaming down her face. "He's stabilizing." Kale's presence rippled through their minds once more. Not as chaotic flashes, but as a gentle, coherent message. Gratitude, hope, resolve "We did it," Jehoon murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "You're safe now." As news of Kale's survival spread throughout the fleet, morale soared. The crew of the Daegu and the other surviving ships gathered in makeshift mess halls, sharing stories of the battle and honoring those who had fallen. Songs were sung, toasts were made, and promises were exchanged to never forget the sacrifices that had been made. But even amidst the celebration, there was a sobering awareness. This victory wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The ice swarm had been defeated, but humanity couldn't afford to grow complacent. Somewhere out there, beyond the edges of known space, other threats might still lurk. Admiral Park addressed the fleet one final time before they began the long journey home. Her voice echoed across every channel, firm but filled with pride. Today, we proved something important, not just to ourselves but to the universe. Humanity is resilient. We are united, and above all, we are compassionate. We do not leave our own behind. Whether they are human or alien, living or dead, we honor their memory and carry their legacy forward. Her words resonated deeply, especially with Jehoon. He thought of the alien civilization that had perished to protect others. Their sacrifice, ensuring that the swarm wouldn't spread further. He thought of Kale, the sole survivor of its kind, now resting safely aboard the Daegu. And he thought of his own crew, their courage, their determination, their refusal to give up. When the convoy returned to Earth, they were greeted as heroes. Crowds lined the streets, cheering wildly as the ships descended into orbit. News outlets broadcast live coverage of the event, calling it the day humanity stood together. Scientists and engineers swarmed the Daegu, eager to study the alien. Technology salvaged from the derelict and integrated into humanity's defenses. Politicians delivered speeches about unity and preparedness, pledging resources to ensure such a threat would never reach Earth again. But the real heroes weren't the politicians or the scientists. They were the ordinary people who had risen to meet extraordinary challenges. Freighters that had once hauled cargo now patrolled the outer reaches of human space. Miners who had once dug for ore now trained as pilots and gunners. Families who had once lived in fear now looked to the stars with hope. Kyle became a symbol of this newfound unity. A new vessel was commissioned in its honor, the KSR Kyle, a sleek, cutting-edge cruiser designed to patrol the edges of human territory. Its hull glimmered faintly, reminiscent of Kale's crystalline form, and its crew wore patches bearing the insignia of the Silent Pact, a promise to remember the fallen and protect the living. Months later, humanity sent a message into the stars. It wasn't a declaration of war or a plea for peace. It was a simple statement, written in every language humanity knew and transmitted across every frequency. To the civilizations of the galaxy, we are here. We are alive, and we will not be silenced. Kyle, now stable and communicating through a neural interface, added its own message, a pulse of light and sound that carried the essence of its people's memory. They were left to die, Kyle projected, its tone reverent yet resolute. But the humans, they shattered the silence. Across 1,000 worlds the story spread, not of war, but of a species that, when faced with extinction, chose to remember the fallen and fight, not for glory, but for life. Far away, in the depths of the Sagittarius void, a single shard of crystal drifted silently through the void. It pulsed faintly, carrying the echoes of a civilization long gone. And somewhere, deep within its fractured core, a spark of hope flickered to life. For even in the vastness of space, silence could speak volumes if someone was willing to listen.